All right, guys, so we're back and welcome to the video. I have two guests with me today. We're gonna talk about business. Now, I know we have some coaches here that follow my channel, so I wanted to bring on my guys, Matt and Kyle. If you have been following the podcast, you can check out our podcast together, and we're gonna do another one in here pretty soon. But today they're gonna talk about business on and offline. So if you are a trainer, you wanna listen up. Kyle and Matt, Kyle's gonna go over what he's done, Matt's gonna go over what he's done. They're gonna give you a quick intro and then go into what they do to make some money as professionals in the fitness industry. Let's get after it.
My name's Kyle Dobbs. I'm the founder and owner of Compound Performance. And from a training history perspective, I've been in the industry just at 15 years, as a coach, as a manager, as a multi-club manager, and then as a national education and training director for a company based out of New York. For the last 3 years, I've been operating Compound Performance, and we work with training clients and training athletes from a remote perspective, as well as trainer education in both individual and group formats. So we do a little bit of both. I brought Matt on to help me out and work with a lot of our athletes, especially our strength athletes, about 2 years ago. And let him introduce himself.
Hey guys, my name is Matt. I've been working with Compound Performance since January of 2020 or 2019. Kyle originally brought me on to just fill a gap that we had in remote programming and remote coaching. He brought me on specifically because a lot of powerlifters and strength athletes are interested in the stuff that we've been doing. So he brought me on as somebody who can provide better programming and coaching for them as somebody with actual experience in the field.
One of the biggest things that we find when we're working with our people and our groups is trainers have a hard time setting their price points for both in-person and remote services. So the thing that we start everybody with is determining what their actual dollar per hour is from a work perspective. And if you don't know that, there's a few ways that you can find out, right? You can look at the work you've been doing over the past 6 to 12 months and average that out to what you're taking home from a net perspective. Or you can look at what the market actually demands where you live, right? Because there will be a geographic proximity that will determine your market value from a training perspective. If you're living and working in New York City, your price per hour is probably going to be much different than if you're in the Midwest. So to break down this conversation, we usually go with $100 per hour just because it makes easier math for us. And we're a bunch of meatheads and math is hard. So we go for $100 and we're gonna start everything with this number right here, right? So when we start looking at in-person services, the way that we can scale that service is training more people within that same hour. So our first step is gonna be looking at duets or doubles, right? Where we're training 2 people at a time, could be partner training. And what we're looking for is we want profitability on this hour because we're doing more work training more people, but we can also kill 2 birds with 1 stone and give the clients themselves a price break, right? To make it more appealing, we can open up our actual pool of potential clients, right? So what we're looking at there is a $75 per person price range. So now we're making $150 an hour rather than $100 an hour. So we can train 2 duets for every 3 in-person training clients and make the same amount of money, right? So that's hyper profitability. If you want to take that further, you can look at semi-private. And semi-private has a lot of definitions across the industry. We like to keep it pretty simple and we go from like 3 to 6 people is what we're typically looking at there. So if we're looking at making this hyper profitable again, we have to look at that 3 number. So an easy sample price range for this would be $60 an hour, right? So that even at the lowest amount of people in that class, we're making $180 per hour now. So our range is going to be anywhere between $180 and $360 per hour, right? So again, now we're looking at the potential of training 1 semi-private class for every 3 independent clients, right? So if you want to work on quality of life, if you want to be able to make more money or the same amount of money in less time, this type of actual vertical growth is a good way to kind of go about that process. And you can scale this up farther than semi-private as well. The next grouping would be what we would call like small group. So that's going to be anywhere between 7 to 10 or 12 people. And an easy sample price range for that would probably be somewhere in that $40 range, maybe even down to the $35, $30 range. So now you can attract an entirely different price point population to come into your services, right? And you can scale that as high as you want to do. And what we found again is, we know that the more people that you're training in 1 hour, the less amount of individual attention you're going to be giving to those people, right? And the biggest thing that we just want to make sure that trainers understand is that's okay, right? It's a different service point. We're never going to compare our group services to our individual service, but that's why people pay a premium for individual services, right? But that doesn't mean that we should be always so exclusive that we can't have other people have access to us on a lower service model. So this type of scaling is what we would be looking at to make sure that you're going to be hyper profitable for your in-person clients. And this is a pretty easy way to go about the process. Again, you might have to change the numbers around a little bit, but the biggest thing that we're looking at is the duets have to be profitable off of the individual hour. The semi-private has to be profitable off of the duets, and the small group has to be profitable off of the semi-private. If they're not profitable, if you're not making more money within that hour, it's not worth scaling. So that's the big thing to remember, is make sure your math checks out when you start making these numbers. As we look at remote, the big system that we use is most of our people, depending on how many calls a week or how many calls a month that you're doing with your clients, what your check-in strategy looks like, we tend to spend somewhere between 2 and 3 hours per month per client for remote, right? So that might include a consultation and follow-up call each month, one time, plus maybe weekly check-ins from an email perspective, and then the actual writing of the programs. So for you, it might be more time, it might be less depending on what your model looks like. For us, 2 to 3 hours works pretty well. Again, also makes for pretty easy math. So we're gonna use this same dollar per hour ratio, and we're gonna call it 250. And this ensures, again, that the remote coaching is actually worth doing. Right? What we run into is most of the trainers that we work with undercharge and undervalue the remote coaching because it doesn't have that in-person connection. It doesn't have the relationship feel, but you are still writing programming. And the biggest thing that we try to get across to the people we work with is your programming should not be less than, it shouldn't be worse because it's remote, right? So if you're looking at principle-based programming, it's gonna be the same level of programming, but it's gonna be a lesser service because you're not seeing those people in person. You're not able to give individual cues on the floor and things like that. But the programming itself is still gonna be high quality, same quality, right? So what we're looking at is $250 a month. And then if your clients do want more check-in calls, if they do want to speak to you more frequently, that's obviously a time bottleneck. That's where you're going to charge $100 an hour a la carte calls. So your clients can book those with you anytime on top of the singular call that you're giving them from a just basic product standpoint and the program that you're providing for them. If you want to have a couple different scaling options, you can have pricing that includes more frequent calls as a set, right? You just want to make sure that time commit matches what your dollar per hour dictates. So Matt's just scaling it up here. The third option that we work with on people is a hybrid model. So if you're working both in person and remote, and you have all the systems set up for it and the platform set up for it, there's no reason that you shouldn't be running a hybrid program. And this ends up being the best of both worlds for a lot of the people that we work with, where you have a remote coaching base of that $250 per month, based on our example. And then you're adding on individual training sessions in person for that client. So you might work with somebody one time a month in person and then have remote on top of it. You might work with them twice a month or once a week and then have the remote piggybacked on top of it. And again, you can scale all that into 250, 350, 450, 550 and set packages based on the frequency that you're working with them, plus the actual remote programming that you're providing them off session. So Matt's just scaling that up too. So for a lot of our people, this ends up being the option they're kind of going to now based on the platforms they're using and based on the technology they have available to them. It's nice because it also meets your clients at a pretty easy opt-in rate from a training perspective, right? You're looking at $650 to $700 a month, depending on how many times they're training, but they're still getting anywhere between 24 and 30 sessions a month programmed out for them. So they're getting high quality training, but they're also able to meet with you enough in person to build and maintain that relationship that, you know, most of us know that training is really built on a lot of the time. So this gives them an easier opt-in point, and it also saves them a little bit of money. And for you, you can work really efficiently and have a lot more free time for the same amount of profitability margins. That's all I got. Perfect. I feel like that was I blacked out on that one.
All right, guys, so there you have it. Hope you can take this with you. A huge amount of knowledge here. Make sure you follow them on Instagram. Kyle, what's your Instagram?
Compound Performance with an underscore.
Mine is Matt Domney, MattDomney.
And also, it just looks like this, but they're not really that big, and I'm not really that small. Make sure you subscribe, hit the notification, hit the like button. I'll see you again next time. Peace.